Welcome to the CRE Report. I'm your host, Chris Burr. We want to give you an update on the Palisades situation from a person who unfortunately lost their home in this Palisades fire. He's a co-founder of Andrew Kirsh, a real estate attorney, been on the show before, Andrew Kirsh. Andrew, welcome back. I really appreciate you taking the time. I think the most obvious question to start with, just how are you and your family holding up?
Chris, thanks for having me on again. We're staying strong. It's if it only happened to us, I think we would have different feelings. But to know that there's, I don't know, 6,000 families, maybe more, who are going through what I'm going through, it's in one way you take comfort in knowing that people are going through what you're going through, but in another way, that's what's so devastating is that the entire community is going through this. So it's really a wave of emotions, and how the question that you just asked me, I may answer it differently 2 hours from now, and that's just how every day is.
Well, I think that's why I wanted to have you back. Like having that much uncertainty in your life when you've got a family. I mean, it's challenging enough just to get through life, let alone with that much uncertainty, just to give people an opportunity to connect to what people like you and the Palisades are going through. If you don't mind, because I know everyone didn't see the really outstanding Zoom group call you did a while back. It was about 3 weeks ago, but you shared a really powerful, heart-touching story about you and your son. If you can walk us through, like, hey, life is great. You're living in the Palisades. It's a new year. And then all of a sudden, when did you find out, oh my gosh, we may have to evacuate? And then you do. And then that night you're with your son and had a pretty heart-touching story.
Yeah, well, I mean, to even go back, it's, we had our winter vacation. My kids are 10 and 8. My wife and my kids, we were in Europe for 2 weeks, an unbelievable European trip. But you know how when you travel, whether you're traveling for just a couple of days or traveling for 2 weeks, especially with little ones in Europe, and it's cold, and it's an urban type of it's not a vacation, it's a trip, right? And so we got back that Sunday, January 5th, late at night. Then they had Monday. My wife, who typically does this walk in the morning from our house to overlooking the bluffs and the ocean, she called me and she said, we were talking about how great our trip was, but it was so great to be home. It was so great to be back in the Palisades. It was blue skies, beautiful winter, crisp morning, and she was just relishing of being back home. And then the next day, the fires occurred. She called me at 10:30, 11 in the morning. She said she was going to take the kids out of school. The fire seemed, not on top of the village, which is where our kids go to school, village school, which is right in the downtown Palisades. And we had been through this before, evacuations a couple times and fires in the hillside, but never in our wildest dreams did we ever think it would get to the village. We are literally a couple blocks from a fire station. We're a couple blocks from Caruso's shopping village, the downtown, the schools, the library, the retail stores, the restaurants. We never thought, no one thought who lived in what's called the alphabet streets, that the fire would impact us. And therefore, we really didn't even take much of anything. And most of my neighbors, same thing. They hardly took anything out of their house because we thought we'd be back 24 hours.
So you go to the hotel, and if you don't mind, share the story you shared on that Zoom call about just your experience, what you were seeing, and your conversation with your son.
Yeah. So later that afternoon, about 4 or 5 o'clock, we realized, okay, because we initially held up at my in-laws' house at Rustic Canyon, which is a mile at most from the Palisades. So when thinking back, it's like if you're going to evacuate, not just go down the road. But that also lends itself to how we didn't think it was going to be that impactful. So we ended up at a hotel that night. It was like a Palisadian refugee camp of all families trying to get information. Is your house still standing? Is it not? And even that night, going to dinner, I knew things weren't looking good, but I was holding out hope. And then on the 11 o'clock news, I saw Rick Caruso on the news, and he was just so angry. He was frustrated. He was giving a very sobering, objective view. And then I knew we were in trouble. And that night, my wife and I sort of split up. We had two rooms. One room I was with my son. My wife was with my daughter, and it was the toughest night of sleep. I don't even call it sleep. It wasn't even sleep. Every hour I was basically up trying to find updates. And I was extremely emotional, sobbing. And my son would wake up. He doesn't remember it now, but he would wake up. He'd say, "Dad, why are you crying?" And you know what, Chris? It wasn't that I knew that we lost our house. It was that I knew we lost our community, that we lost the school, that we or were. I knew at that time, that we probably lost our school, our little league, the dance, where my daughter does dance, the orthodontist, the restaurants, everything that makes a community, I knew was going to be gone. And so what now? That is what was heartbreaking for me, having kids at 10 and 8 years old at their peak adolescent years of enjoying the things that the Palisades had to offer, was really the worst of it all.
And what's fascinating is just before we went on today, you said, "Hey, Chris, I got to take this phone call." And right after the call, you're like, "Man, that was," I think you said, number 10 out of 12 from my son's baseball team that are now moving to different communities. So it sort of falls in line with what I think you probably thought was going to happen. And now it's bearing out to be true.
Yeah, that's the real unfortunate. Look, the Palisades is a affluent community, and there are quite a few families that have second homes. So if a family had a second home, they were gone within 24 hours, 48 hours tops. How long are they going to be in that second home location? It's unclear. Is it 6 months, 12 months, 2 years? The thing that's happening, and as we're talking with our friends who have left, to whether it's a second home location, whether it's a location that their parents or other family members are from, once they're at this new location, they're building new roots. They're building friendships. The kids are getting restabilized to then take that family unit and come back to the Palisades and shock your kid's system and their infrastructure and their social network again. That's tough. So everyone is in this cycle of it's not so much the short day-to-day term of dealing with insurance companies and lenders and contractors. That's not the difficult part. It's the medium to long-term decision that is the hard part of what to do. And so we don't know if they're going to come back.
Which I'm going to get to that in a moment. Have you been back to your place since January 7th?
Yes, it is as if my house and every other house in the neighborhood went through a cremation machine. It is unbelievable. It's like sand. The fire, I think it's about 5,000 or 6,000 homes that burnt down, and my neighborhood, called the Alphabet Streets, is essentially the worst hit spot, because the fire started, or they believe it started, adjacent to what we call the Palisades Highlands, which is hillside. There's reports that there was a fire on New Year's morning. The fire department put it out, but apparently it was still smoldering. And the high winds that we had, the dry air, what people think is that it reignited the fire. It wasn't sufficiently put out. But the highlands and the hillside area, I don't know, it could be a good 5+ miles from the downtown part of the Palisades. I mean, it is a long ways away. I mean, people are saying this was the size of two Manhattans that burnt down. So, um, you asked me if I went back to my house, right? So the Alphabet Streets, 1,000 homes, 99% of them are gone.
You said something a couple times that intrigued me that I just want to see, and it's kind of a sensitive question, but you said, "Hey, Chris, we've evacuated before. I just didn't think anything was going to go on this time." Why did you feel, hey, this nothing's going to happen this time, or did you feel like, hey, the government's going to show up? They're going to like what was there for you? Like, this not going to be that big of a deal, and all of a sudden, like you said, now it's almost sand.
The hillside has had fires before. Brentwood Hillside, the 405 freeway, when connecting the valley to the city, has had fires before. The Palisade Hillside has had fires before. Malibu, of course, has had a lot of fires. They've all been contained in the hillside. They have not gotten down to the more urban, dense part of the Palisades. Hasn't even come close. And so that was our thought process, that the fire department would contain the fire in the hillside. If there would be certain homes that got burned or burned down, it would be those adjacent to hillside. The irony is, a lot of the homes adjacent to hillside were saved because all the resources went there first. But with a lot of it was a lot of factors. It was an extremely windy day, right? It was one of the windiest days that we've had in LA, especially in West LA. But the fire department ran out of water. The LADWP and the fire department, they ran out of water.
Man, I have so many questions for you. You're an attorney. There's obviously litigation that's either happening and about to happen. I know there's a limited amount you can talk about there. We'll get to that in a moment. But my question for you, because you're an attorney, lots going to come out in discovery. There's a lot of theories out there about what started this fire, what happened. Like you just mentioned, no water in the hydrants. And I mean, a lot of it sounds like you couldn't make this up. So as an attorney, and I'm sure you've done a lot of research, what's your theory and or thesis on what started this and where were the lack of resources to help keep it out? On top of, I will add, if you want to speak to this, there was a lot of National Weather Service warnings, if you will, about the winds a few days before. So it wasn't like it was completely unprepared from that standpoint.
So let's go back a couple of years when we had the hurricane in the summer. I think it may have been summer of 23, I believe. And we were getting warnings, and I think Karen Bass even called for a national or a state of emergency. And what that did was it allowed her to be prepared and get resources from other jurisdictions, other counties. I don't know, maybe she got federal and state resources to be on the ground ready in case the hurricane caused damage. It turned out that it was a lot of rain. It wasn't a significant situation, and a lot of these resources weren't necessary. So you fast forward that 2 years later, and we got a lot of weather reports, like you said, that we were going to have hurricane type winds, but the state of emergency was not called until later that evening. So the fire started around 10:30 in the morning. My understanding, the state of emergency was not called until, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 p.m. that evening. And from my understanding, had she called the state of emergency earlier that morning or even a day or two before, she would have been able to call resources from other counties and other states to be prepared. The LA Times had an article saying that even the LA County Fire Department had the ability to station fire trucks around the hillside area and would have prevented the spread of the fire. You have that. You've got a reservoir that is dedicated to the Palisades that was completely dry. And what is so frustrating to me and my neighbors is that the amount of the bid to repair that reservoir was about $130,000, and it was offline for a year. There was a layer that was a covering, a protective covering, because it's drinkable water that was ripped, and bird poop was getting into the water, and so they needed to fix that protective coating or layering. 12, 14 months went by without having water in that reservoir. Brush has not been cleared for decades. Rick Caruso has been talking about that. I mean, there are just so many things that led to literally the most destructive urban fire in the history of the United States. Certainly costly. The estimates are between Palisades and Altadena. We can't forget about Altadena.
Yeah.
It's $250 billion.
I want to come back to that first. You mentioned Rick Caruso a couple of times. You're watching the news that night. He went live when he found out the hydrants were dry. When you heard that, what was your initial reaction?
Anger.
Yeah.
Just anger. It's just, I feel the government has one job: to keep us safe. Whether it's police or fire, just keep us safe.
So sorry, go ahead.
No, and they didn't. And look, I understand it's a very, very difficult job. Okay, but the lack of preparation, the lack of coordination is just crystal clear. And we don't do things as a preemptive measure. Unfortunately, we do things after the fact, and it's too late.
Andrew, I know you're trying to be gracious because you're a lifelong resident here, and yet to say we do it, I mean, there's fires here all the time. So
You're right.
So I just think, again, I appreciate you being gracious. You live here, you got a business here, but to be honest, this isn't unanticipated. So it's a little bit hard for me to swallow. And I'm not even from here to see how this went down from a lack of coordination and just execution. So with that being said, I know you can't talk about specific litigation. And as an attorney, when you go into discovery, give us the canvas here. Like, what are you going to focus on? Where do you think there's, I hate to use the word opportunity, but opportunity to actually get your outcome? And what is the overall outcome within this litigation?
Yeah, and look, I'm not pursuing the litigation as an attorney. I'm a plaintiff, and I've been as an attorney, people and a member of the community, people have asked me, do I think there's a case here? We're going with Boyle Law Firm, Kevin Boyle, and in talking with him, who's a plaintiff's contingency expert. Look, it's not going to be easy because there's government immunity, but any duty that the government does have has been breached. Okay, and so whether it's the reservoir, whether there's transformers that may have fallen down, whether it's the lack of preparation, the lack of water, not calling for the state of emergency earlier. And as facts develop, it will be quite obvious that there was a failure on so many parts. And so there's many litigations that have already been filed. There will be more that will be filed. It's to compensate the residents who have lost literally everything. Insurance is not going to be sufficient. It just isn't, because unfortunately, most of the people that I've spoken to, me included, are underinsured. The cost to rebuild our homes post January 7th is significantly more, that's the projection, than if one of us had a fire pre-January 7th. That's the reality. And so how to make up that delta? We didn't ask for this. In fact, I didn't even live in a fire zone. My insurance company did not terminate my policy like they terminated so many others who are in a fire zone. They didn't consider the Alphabet Streets a fire zone. And so when you just look at it from a 30,000 foot view, in 2025, in no way should 5, 6, 7,000 homes burn. We have plenty of resources in this city, in this state, in this country, plenty of money that should be able to prevent something like this from happening, even with sizable ones.
So this tort litigation, I'm presuming, is going to be against the state or the community, like LA County, all of the above.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's been lawsuits that have already been filed with respect to the Palisades fire against LADWP and the city of LA.
My question is, you and I both know at least a little bit about the balance sheet of the city of LA, and you're saying, hey, Chris, we just want to be made whole. Where's that money going to come from?
It's unclear whether they have insurance, whether the state is going to contribute, whether the federal government is going to contribute. That is at least what I see as the way to make these neighbors whole.
Which I understand. I think, as you can probably presume, I don't even know how to really say this without, I want to say this in a very kind way. And yet there's a lot of people out there that look at the Palisades, as you mentioned, a very affluent area. There's not going to be a lot of tears dropped for that, even though it's a destructive situation. All of a sudden you're saying, okay, now the rest of America is going to pay for the negligence of LA. This just might be tough for some people to chew on. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I look at it differently. I look at it as there's that we have suffered through one of the worst disasters in our country's history. And whether it's hurricanes in Florida or storms in other parts of the country, regardless of the socioeconomic status of a neighborhood, that's only a segment of the community. The Palisades, I would say at least 50% of the neighborhood that I was in within the Palisades, the homes were built in the 50s and 60s. You had older residents still living in them, certainly not affluent. They had just been lifelong Palisadians.
And I'm not saying it shouldn't happen, Andrew. I guess, like, when you talk about a hurricane, like, that is obviously a weather-related event. This one, I think a lot of people are going to see is just the negligence of leaders, right? So I think there's that distinction where, again, I agree, people should be made whole. We want to take care of our people. I could just see how some people are going to, wait a second, these people did not do their jobs, and that's the view they're going to see it through. Does that make sense?
Yeah, look, it does. And so I do believe that there is a change in how a lot of people, at least in the Palisades, view politics and view their government leaders and view what's important as to what government leaders should focus on. And that's why I go back to my original statement that government's initial job, most important job, is to keep us safe. For federal government, it's probably from an external invasion. For local government, it's police and fire. And if you can't keep people safe or have people feel that they're safe, then the rest doesn't matter. Then you don't have a society, you don't have a community. And so I sure hope that I know the Palisades will be rebuilt, and I know it will be great again. I just don't know who is going to make up the Palisades. That is what, if you go back to the night of the January 7th and why I was so emotional and why my son asked me, Dad, why are you crying? Is because the community won't be the same. Our friends will have left. Our baseball team will be gone. And, look, we're, for the most part, all but I know there were a few fatalities. We are safe. We are safe. But I never looked at my house as a sort of like we have a family of four, two kids, my wife, me. It was almost like my house was my fifth family member. And I
Mm,
didn't realize that
wow.
until January 8th, until the next day. Um, and it really became apparent when the house, the home, is what sort of hugs and sort of like envelops the family and keeps it together. And so over the last, how long has it been? 6 weeks, and we've been in we've been in an amazing house of my clients. We're at an apartment now. It's not our home, and so that is what's missing. We will get it again, um, and I think that's what is causing so much heartache. It's like a family member has died. But beyond just one family member, it's like the community died. It's the death of the community. It'll be rebuilt, and I think it's going to be even better, but it's going to take time.
That analogy, Andrew, was so powerful about your fifth family member. So thank you for framing it that way. You're a very positive guy. Even on the Zoom call, you're one of the more optimistic people on that call versus some of the others. So I appreciate what you're sharing about being rebuilt. And let's just have an honest conversation about it. There's a lot of different theories out there around what may have started this fire. We didn't really dive into that. So if you want to share your thesis around what you think instigated it, great. Also, though, in the context of this rebuilding situation, like when you tell me, hey, Chris, 10 out of 12 sons on my son's baseball team are not going to be part of this community anymore. To me, that says, hey, 10 out of 12 families are no longer coming back to the Palisades. So how does it get rebuilt when you touched on this conversation in the Zoom? Let's say that the Kershaws are the first family back in the Palisades. Do you really want construction around you for the next 3 to 5? There's all those different variables that are just tough to chew on.
Look, that is literally the conversation that monopolizes mine and my wife's and all of our friends day to day, is the timing and the timing of getting back into our homes. Some people feel like they're going to get back in their homes by the end of 2026. Others feel like it could be 5 years. We don't know. And we don't know because we are trusting the same government that has contributed to this problem. It was difficult to build prior to January 7th. Is it going to be more difficult? Is it going to be easier? How's the permitting process going to be? What's insurance going to be like? Can we get insurance? What's the infrastructure going to be like? The Palisades had horrendous infrastructure still, overhead power lines and dated sewer and water systems. I personally I don't want them to rush. I want to be back into my home quickly, but I don't want them to rush because I want them, this is the opportunity to rebuild a community, not for 2030, but for 2100.
Mm-hmm.
Let's have the best infrastructure possible. Let's make sure this doesn't happen again, whether it's fire retardant materials, whether it's burying the power lines, whether it's other things we can do to make sure this doesn't happen again. The Palisades is a beautiful place. It is right adjacent to the ocean and hillside and mountains and parks and low density, yet also have this urban feel as well. It was a place where my wife literally never got into a car. She walked our kids to school. We walked to Little League, to dance, to the restaurants, to the supermarket, you name it. It's very hard to find a place like that in LA where residential and retail and other services are within walking distance. That's what makes it so tough. It's very hard to replicate.
So fair assessment, is it 2035 and the Palisades is, as you said, great again, or is it 2030, 24? It's a tough question, I know, but just best guesstimation.
Yeah, because you could be the first person there and your house is back, but you're living through a construction zone for years. And it's not just a construction zone of just residential. It's everything. The schools, the library, office buildings, retail, streets. You are literally building a city again. And I've been, as a real estate lawyer, part of these mass development projects. And the one thing the Palisades, no offense to other communities that are more master planned community, the Palisades was not like that. They don't want to be like that. They don't want to have just a couple of floor plans and have every house look the same. That was not the Palisades. The streets are narrow. Just the logistics of getting construction crews in and out is going to be challenging. It's a big debate. Some of my best, brightest real estate development clients think literally end of 26, first homes will be back. And other clients of mine feel 5 to 7 years for sure.
Wow. So what did Rick Caruso do to save his development there?
Well, he's been on multiple podcasts and he's been public about it. I think it's two things. One, he used fire retardant materials that he learned was necessary because he built the Rosewood Miramar in Montecito, and that was built, I think, right after a large fire up there. And secondly, a private fire department, which I would say is the main reason why his structure is still standing.
And I asked it that way because if there was, I guess, what do you see was the biggest, I'll say, mistake or negligence on part of the government that caused this?
The problem was, and I'm not a fire fighting expert, but all the resources went to the hillside, and then as the fire spread quickly, there wasn't any fire personnel to help thwart the fire in the Alphabet Streets or the Bluffs area, and the fact that the second largest city in the United States and one of the biggest economies in the world could run out of water, or the water pressure could get to such a low amount that they couldn't fight fires, is just unspeakable. It just is. This is 2025.
Have you gotten any answers on how that happened yet?
No. I mean, one theory is that the reservoir was completely dry.
Wow. Anything else that I'm not asking you think people should know?
It's I think the issue is there's no right or wrong answer as to what a family decides to do. Almost like if you analogize it to COVID, some people left, some people stayed, some people wore masks, some people didn't, some people congregated, some people didn't. Whatever is right for a particular family is the right decision. Some people will stay, some people will leave. Some people will switch schools, some people will stay. Every decision is so unique based on the family dynamic, the age of their kids. Do they have a social network in LA, a family network in LA? Do they not have a family network in LA? their job situation. Can their job be done elsewhere, or does it have to be done in LA? And so I think this, similar to COVID, is going to be one of the more interesting societal experiments that we're going to see. And we're going to see this diaspora of Palisadian families go to Manhattan Beach, Orange County, San Diego, and throughout the whole country.
And I'm glad you wrapped it there, because I was going to ask, as a real estate attorney, you've got the World Cup coming in 26, the Super Bowl 27, the Olympics in 28. I'm long Los Angeles. I'm curious though, because you've got a lot more experience in real estate than I do. Are you long LA in real estate here? Or is it like, hey, Chris, with no insurance and all the negligence that's been taking place, I mean, one of the guests in your Zoom moved to Miami. I mean, are you like, hey, I'm not long LA, or where are you at?
People are angry. People feel let down. People feel that they pay, 13, 14% state income tax. They pay gross receipts tax. They pay high property tax. They just pay a ton in taxes. And what do they get for it? They got their house burnt down. They are pissed. They feel betrayed, and they want and have moved. My wife was looking at listings of suburbs of Nashville days after the fire. Now, we're both from LA. We are lifelong Los Angelinos. I have a law firm in Century City. My whole network is here. I walk down the street of West LA and I run into people. It is hard for me to leave, but I'm talking to people who are the same characteristics that I just mentioned, and they're testing the waters. They have moved to Idaho, to Utah, to Vegas, to other parts, to Florida, maybe other parts of California that they think are more business centric. They're pissed.
So with that being said, my political brain goes, maybe this is an opportunity. And I say, I know people have got short memories, and yet 26 passes up, Newsom's out in 26. I mean, based on the conversations you're having, if Rick Caruso was mayor, maybe it was a different outcome, right? So do you think there's an opportunity? I look at California, Andrew, and I just think, man, with the ag and the energy, all the resources the state has, this should be like the Garden of Eden. Like, we should be Florida times a million, in my opinion, right? So is there an opportunity, do you think, in 26 and beyond for some leadership change to make California golden again?
100%. I do. It has all the resources. It just needs proper leadership. And it had proper leadership before. It's what made the state. It's not the reason why it made this state great, but you've got obviously great weather. You've got all the attributes of why people want to live here. But if I feel like our politicians in this state and city take for granted that people will always want to be here. And that's not going to be the case. And I know firsthand it's not the case because of how many families have left.
Yeah. Fascinating conversation, man. I appreciate the time. Anything else you want to add or share before we wrap it up?
No, I appreciate, Chris, you having me on now a second time. I wish this wasn't the topic, but it's it's unfortunately it did happen, and I think that my final takeaway is, let's make sure we do everything we can that this doesn't happen again. There will always be fires, obviously, and we live on the hillside, but there are so many protective measures that we need to implement so that the next generation, or forget the next generation, the next fire doesn't do what did on January 7th to both Altadena and the Palisades and Malibu.
Last question, because I think you probably had some of these conversations either with him or at least within some of those circles. Does Caruso run for governor, mayor, or nothing in 2026?
I mean, just follow him on his podcast. Joe, Joe Rogan and others. He's taking the Donald Trump playbook, who did all those podcasts, right, to reach as many people as possible, to use the new media. I sure hope he runs again, and whether it's mayor or governor, he had my vote a couple of years ago, and I know he had a lot of my neighbors' votes. But I hope the city or the state at large can see having a practical, entrepreneurial, business-minded, smart person at the helm is necessary.
I mean, all the candidate needs to do, whether it's Caruso or you, even if it was me, is just take that clip of Bass and Ghana with a reporter asking her questions, and she didn't say a word. And I just think you represents that, and you walk into the mayor. I mean, it's just that was a shocking. You don't need to comment unless you want to, but that was a stunning clip.
Look, I don't know what she was doing there and how she was benefiting the city, but we needed leadership, and we didn't get it.
We'll leave it there. Andrew Kirsh, appreciate it again, co-founder at Sklar Kirsh. If you have any real estate needs, for an attorney, he's your guy. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon, Andrew.
Thank you so much, Chris. Appreciate it.